Imagine that the foundation on which all our knowledge of the past is built is actually unstable and unreliable. What if the history we were taught in schools and universities is only a carefully edited version of events, created with one goal: to hide the existence of a great European proto-civilization? We are used to seeing antiquity as the cradle of culture, but ancient texts tell a different story. They whisper that long before Rome and Athens, a powerful empire existed in the north, and its traces were deliberately erased. That whisper became a loud voice in 1867, when an astonishing discovery was made public in the Netherlands, one that stirred minds and frightened the academic world. It was a manuscript known as the Ora Linda Book. This document, miraculously preserved through the centuries, does not simply add to what we know, it turns everything upside down, offering a completely different timeline of human history. The very story of how this manuscript survived feels like a high-stakes detective novel, full of secrets and danger. The text opens with a dramatic message dated to the year 1256 by the traditional calendar. The author, Hito of the Ora Linda family, writes to his son with anxiety and determination. "My son, you must protect these books with body and soul," he writes. This is not a simple request. It is a final testament. Hito describes how he saved the scrolls during a devastating flood, copying them onto new paper so the knowledge of the ancestors would not vanish into oblivion. But what was he so afraid of? Why did these writings have to be hidden for centuries? The answer lies in the message itself. The author begs that the eyes of monks must never see these works. His words carry a serious accusation. Those in power and those who write official history are deceitful. They seek to destroy all memory of the ancient freedoms, rights, and duties of the Frisian people, conspiring with kings to do so. Knowledge of the true past is a powerful weapon, and for centuries it was taken away to keep people in ignorance, erasing the memory of a time when humanity lived by entirely different laws. So what was so dangerous on these pages that they had to be hidden under threat of death? The manuscript describes events that took place more than 4,000 years ago and tells of the destruction of a vast land called Atland. The description is strikingly similar to legends of Atlantis, but with a geographic focus that may shock modern researchers. This is not a mythical island at the edge of the world, but a real territory that sank beneath the sea. The ancient author claims that this catastrophe was the turning point that reshaped the entire planet. We are standing on the threshold of a secret that was meant to be buried under water and time. Before we open the first page of this forbidden history and learn what truly happened in those dark ages, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell. The truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is something everyone deserves to know. The mention of a mysterious land swallowed by the ocean is not just a poetic metaphor or an echo of myths common to every culture. The Ora Linda manuscript gives a chillingly precise date for the event that divided human history into before and after. The ancient authors point to the year 2193 BCE, more than 4,200 years ago. This period is remembered in chronicles not as an age of prosperity, but as a moment of global silence, when the greatest cultures on Earth suddenly collapsed or fell into deep decline. The scale of the disaster goes far beyond a local flood. When the manuscript's data is compared with official chronology, it becomes clear that this was the same period when Egypt's Old Kingdom collapsed, the powerful Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia fell apart, the Harappan civilization in the Indus Valley disappeared, and the Longshan culture in China came to an end. For a long time, scholars could not find a single cause for this simultaneous collapse, blaming droughts or social unrest. But the Frisian manuscript names a specific reason. The destruction of the Frisian Federation in Europe was part of a planetary cataclysm. Independent researcher Alvin Raubenheimer shed light on the nature of this disaster. By studying the manuscript and comparing it with modern data from oceanography, geology, and climatology, he concluded that the ancient authors were describing the aftermath of a colossal tsunami. It was a wall of water, likely caused by a cosmic impact or a tectonic shift in the North Atlantic, that wiped out coastal civilizations and permanently changed the shape of continents. What entered biblical tradition as the Great Flood takes on the form of a real physical event, one that destroyed millions of lives and erased entire states from the map. Raubenheimer's work, titled Survivors of the Great Tsunami, shows that the text discovered in the 19th century describes geological realities with astonishing accuracy. Realities that forgers of that era simply could not have known. But the most surprising part is what happened afterward. When the waters receded, the world lay in ruins. We are taught to believe that Europe at that time was a dark, savage land, populated by barbarians who only later received enlightenment from the Greeks and Romans. Yet the surviving pages claim the opposite. According to these records, it was the survivors of a highly developed northern culture, driven from their homeland, who moved south, carrying knowledge, technology, and social systems with them. Those history calls the savage ancestors of Europeans may, in fact, have been the forgotten teachers of the ancient world, laying the foundations for future empires. Those who survived this global cataclysm and emerged from the raging waters were not primitive savages whose culture went no further than fire-making and hunting. Contrary to popular belief, they did not regress or lose their identity. Instead, they became the guardians of immense knowledge accumulated by their ancestors over thousands of years. This is where alternative history delivers its most shocking break with convention. We are used to imagining Europe 4,000 years ago as a land of dense forests, scattered tribes, crude tools, and simple huts. Official science calls this the Late Neolithic or Early Bronze Age. But the Oera Linda manuscript paints a picture that forces us to rethink the entire path of human progress. The text describes the so-called Phrygian Federation, a highly developed society that existed in what is now Europe. Their level of technology seems unbelievable for that era, while the rest of the world, according to textbooks, was just learning to work with soft bronze. These northern craftsmen already knew the secrets of carbon steel. They did not travel only on foot. They used war chariots and organized complex cavalry maneuvers, giving them undeniable military superiority. Their knowledge of astronomy and navigation allowed long sea voyages, and their mathematics was advanced enough to support large-scale construction and effective state administration. Perhaps the strongest blow to establish dogma is the claim about the origin of writing. For centuries, historians taught that the alphabet was a Phoenician gift, later adopted and refined by the Greeks. The ancient manuscript states unequivocally that what we call the Greek alphabet, and even Arabic numerals, were invented here in the north, long before Mediterranean cultures flourished. In this version of history, the Phoenicians and Greeks are not inventors, but students who adopted a symbolic system from a far older civilization. This primacy extends beyond technology to social structure. Concepts we proudly associate with ancient Greece or the modern world: democracy, free enterprise, respect for individual rights, and even monotheism were everyday norms in the Phrygian Federation. Women held high status and real rights, taking part in governance and the preservation of tradition, a sharp contrast to the patriarchal societies around them. It appears that Athens did not invent democracy, but attempted to revive what had once been a natural way of life for their distant predecessors. This raises an obvious question. If this empire was so powerful, enlightened, and technologically advanced, where did it go? Why don't archaeologists find its capitals on modern maps? The answer lies in the aftermath of the Great Disaster. The destruction of their homeland forced the survivors to abandon everything. A great and tragic migration began, scattering the bearers of this culture across the world. This forced exodus became the catalyst for the emergence of peoples we know today, peoples whose true origins remained a mystery for thousands of years. The catastrophe that destroyed ancient Atlant was not the end of its people, but it robbed them of their home forever, turning proud rulers of the north into wanderers. With the land beneath their feet gone, the survivors sought refuge where the elements were less cruel. Vast fleets, loaded with the remnants of their former greatness, moved south, cutting through the waters of the Mediterranean. This forced migration became the hidden mechanism that triggered the rise of the most famous centers of ancient civilization. The manuscript demands a radical rethinking of Mediterranean history, one that leaves traditional historians breathless. According to the text, the founding of cities like Athens, Rome, Marseille, and the Phoenician Tyre was the work of refugees from Northern Europe, people from Frisia and Scandinavia. This completely overturns the familiar narrative in which cultures supposedly spread from the east and south to a barbaric north. Here, the direction of civilization is reversed, from north to south. The book describes the local populations of Greece and Italy at the time, not as philosophers and builders, but as wild tribes living in primitive conditions. It was the newcomers from the north, equipped with technology, writing, and systems of governance, who civilized the future Greeks and Romans, teaching them construction, agriculture, and law. A special place in this story is given to the mysterious Minoan civilization on Crete, and the enigmatic Sea Peoples, whose invasions terrified Egyptian chroniclers. The Oer-Linda manuscript equates these sea wanderers with the surviving Atlantean Frisians. They ruled the seas, controlled trade, and built palaces like those they had known in their homeland. Remarkably, the Minoan civilization was only discovered by archaeologists in the 20th century, while the manuscript, first published in the mid-19th century, already contained information about it. A fact that leaves critics who call the book a forgery at a loss. The narrative goes even further, intertwining with biblical history and ancient Egyptian records. The text identifies the northern refugees as the Hyksos, a foreign dynasty that seized power in Lower Egypt. Their military dominance is explained by their use of iron weapons and war chariots, technologies that were commonplace in the Phrygian Federation. Their rule, however, did not last forever. The expulsion of the Hyksos from the Nile Delta and their flight to Palestine, where they settled in Jerusalem, echoes biblical tradition in striking ways. In the background of these events was the catastrophic eruption of the Santorini volcano, which dealt a fatal blow to Minoan culture and triggered yet another wave of migration. According to this source, both Egyptian and Jewish cultures were profoundly influenced by Western European monotheists. Yet even after finding temporary refuge in the Near East, these tireless wanderers did not stop. Their mission to preserve ancestral knowledge and find safe lands pushed them ever farther. The trail of these people, who began their journey on the shores of the North Sea, leads deep into Asia, to places where historians least expected to find descendants of European seafarers. The story of the Great Exodus does not end on the shores of the Mediterranean. Following the thread of the Oer-Linda manuscript, the route of the ancient exiles stretches much farther, cutting across continents and millennia. One of the most fascinating sections tells of a group led by a chief named Gert. These people, called the Gertmen in the text, did not stop nearby, but continued east, crossing deserts and mountain ranges until they reached the fertile lands of Punjab in modern-day Pakistan. According to the Frisian Chronicle, they settled there and became what academic science would later call the mysterious Aryans, who came from the north. This claim might sound fantastical, if not for striking parallels with the region's oldest texts and archaeological finds. Descriptions in the manuscript echo the Rig Veda, the sacred collection of hymns in Hinduism. Gods and heroes from Indian epic tradition align closely with names and deeds found in the Linda book. Moreover, the influence of these migrants can be traced in the formation of Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia. They brought not only ironworking and pastoral practices, but also a philosophy that shaped Eastern spiritual traditions. In this light, the classic Indo-European theory, with its vague ancestral homeland somewhere in the steppes, begins to fall apart. The manuscript offers a concrete origin: the sunken lands of Western Europe. The most compelling, tangible proof of this migration came in the 20th century. Discoveries the 19th century author could not possibly have known about. These are the famous Tarim mummies, found in the sands of the Taklamakan Desert in western China. They are remarkably preserved bodies with clear European features, light hair, and tall stature. Radiocarbon dating places them between 1500 and 2000 BCE, perfectly matching the migration timeline described in the Linda book. These white people lived in the Tarim Basin, wore textiles resembling Celtic plaids, and used chariots identical to those described in Frisian texts. This perspective forces a complete re-evaluation of figures like Alexander the Great. In traditional history, he is portrayed as a conqueror driven by ambition and lust for power. But in the context of the Linda book, his Eastern campaign takes on a sacred meaning. Alexander was not merely conquering lands, he was returning home. Aware of ancient kinship and ancestral history, he sought out the descendants of the Geatmen and tried to reunite the scattered fragments of a once unified civilization. His fierce struggle against the Persian Empire becomes an attempt to overthrow usurpers and restore the rule of the true bearers of the ancient tradition. All of this may sound like a captivating legend, a beautiful mosaic of myths and hypotheses. Skeptics could dismiss it as a product of imagination, if not for one fact that cannot be forged, invented, or guessed by chance. There is evidence that does not depend on human interpretation, because it is carved by nature itself on the ocean floor. One geological discovery, made possible by modern technology, changes everything and silences even the most ardent critics. Any talented writer can invent an engaging story. One can create fictional languages, elaborate genealogies of imaginary kings, and describe battles that never happened. Literature is full of brilliant hoaxes people want to believe. But there is one thing that cannot be invented at a writing desk in the 19th century: the physical geography of the ocean floor. Words can lie, but the shape of the planet beneath the water cannot. This is where literary debate ends and a hard geological investigation begins, one that leaves skeptics with no answers. At the center of this investigation is a map dated to around the year 1400. It depicts a land long considered a mistake or a legend: Friesland. Not the small province in the northern Netherlands we know today, but a massive landmass, comparable in size to Great Britain, located northwest of Scotland. For centuries, historians mocked this image, calling it a phantom island, a fantasy of sailors lost in fog. It was assumed such land could never have existed. That skepticism vanished when modern technology entered the scene. With satellite scanning and deep-sea sonar, researchers were able to look beneath the dark waters of the North Atlantic. When the outlines of the imaginary Friesland from the 1400 map were overlaid onto modern bathymetric maps of the ocean floor, the result was shocking. At a depth of about 1 kilometer lies a vast plateau. Its contours, ridges, and depressions almost perfectly match the coastline drawn on the medieval map. A 19th century forger could not possibly have known what the Atlantic seabed looked like. This data only became available in the second half of the 20th century. The conclusion is unavoidable. The map is not fantasy, but a copy of far older sources that recorded the world before the sea swallowed the land. Geological evidence is reinforced by archaeology on land. The Oera Linda manuscript contains detailed descriptions of citadels and cities scattered across Europe. For a long time, the age of European settlements was believed to be far younger than the text claimed. But when the book's descriptions are compared with satellite imagery and new excavation data, astonishing matches appear. The layout of ancient sites, their locations, and, most importantly, the age of their foundations suggest that many European cities are thousands of years older than textbooks admit. Against these ancient centers, Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem look young, their ruins silently confirming the truth of the forbidden history. One might think that matching maps and ruins would be enough, but the most decisive proof is hidden not in stone or water, but in the text itself. In one short, seemingly insignificant phrase of just 4 words. It describes a physical phenomenon that a forger from the 19th century could not have imagined, because science had not yet understood such cosmic processes. This detail ends the debate and reveals a terrifying truth about the mechanics of the catastrophe. The strongest argument for the authenticity of the Oera Linda book is a detail easily missed on a quick read. It appears in the description of the horrifying events of 2193 BCE. Amid accounts of raging waters, ruined cities, and dying screams, the ancient chronicler makes a dry, strange, and seemingly out-of-place astronomical observation. He writes just 4 words: "The sun rose higher." This phrase is a true Trojan horse for skeptics. Consider this. If a mid-19th century fraudster were trying to create a convincing flood legend, what details would he include? Traditional disaster narratives of that era leaned on biblical imagery: endless rain, divine wrath, darkness, eclipses. No one would think to say that the sun changed its path in the sky. For a 19th century mind, the sun was a constant. It rose and set where it always had. Claiming it rose higher would have sounded like madness or a copying error. Modern science, however, sees this very differently. Today we know that a collision between Earth and a massive cosmic object, an asteroid or comet, can do more than trigger giant tsunamis. Such an impact can physically affect the planet, even shifting Earth's axis of rotation. A sudden change in axial tilt would instantly alter the apparent position of celestial bodies for observers on the surface. If the axis shifts, the sun at its highest point would indeed appear higher or lower, depending on latitude. A forger in 1867 could not have known about planetary axis shifts caused by impact events. This theory only began developing in the late 20th century and gained broad acceptance in the 21st. Yet the manuscript describes a physical phenomenon that science could explain only centuries after its discovery. This is not myth or metaphor, but a precise, unbiased observation by a surviving eyewitness who recorded a change in celestial mechanics with his own eyes. Knowledge from the future sealed inside a document from the past. Now that all the pieces are assembled, from accurate maps of the ocean floor to confirmed migrations and astronomical anomalies, the picture becomes disturbingly clear. The Oera Linda manuscript is not a forgery or a collection of fairy tales. It is a chronicle of real human tragedy and greatness that was taken from us. For centuries, we were told a history in which our ancestors were powerless barbarians waiting for enlightenment from the East. The truth is that deep in antiquity, a highly developed, free civilization existed, one that perished in a global cataclysm. Its fragments spread across the world, giving rise to the cultures we now call the cradle of humanity. Accepting the authenticity of this text takes courage, because it shatters the foundation of modern historical science. But facts are stubborn, and they keep resurfacing, demanding a reevaluation of our past. We are the heirs of a great forgotten history, and the time has come to reclaim that memory.